She and her best friend carry the Korean Mafia boss's children, but one baby is a lie. The moment Zainab saw those two pink lines, she should have felt terror. Instead, she pressed her palm flat against her stomach, still flat, still soft, and exhaled something that felt dangerously close to relief. She thought about Jae-hyun, the way he had looked at her 3 nights ago, in the quiet hour after midnight when the empire he ran went still and it was just the two of them. His cold exterior cracking just enough for something warmer to breathe through. The way he had spoken in low, careful words, like a man who had never been taught softness but was trying to learn it. For her, she was falling. She had been falling for a while now, and now there was something growing inside her that made it all feel terrifyingly, beautifully real. Zainab, open this door. Kemi's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She didn't knock twice. She never did. The bathroom door swung open, and there she was, Kemi Aderonk, her best friend of 10 years, her person, the woman who had held her hair back in their university dormitory and talked her out of every bad decision except this one. But tonight, Kemi's eyes were red. Her hands were shaking, and she was holding something out toward Zainab like it was a grenade she didn't know how to set down. Pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. Zainab's stomach dropped straight through the floor.
I'm pregnant, Kemi whispered.
Then, before Zainab could find a single word, and there's something I never told you, about the night of the gala, about the room in the East Wing. Her voice cracked. If Jae-hyun ever finds out the truth, Zainab, we won't be safe. Either of us. The ultrasound photo slipped from Zainab's fingers, because in that single, shattering moment, she understood something that rearranged everything she thought she knew. Both of them were pregnant. Both of them were tangled inside the same empire, the same dangerous, beautiful, suffocating empire, built by the most powerful Korean crime syndicate operating quietly across the East Coast. But only one of those babies had a father who was exactly who he was supposed to be, and the secret hiding behind the other one could unravel everything, their friendship, their loves, their lives. Before this story tears you apart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because what comes next will test everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and survival. This story does not go easy on anyone. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 months earlier, Atlanta, Georgia. The Jade Room was not just a club. It was a declaration. Tucked into a discreet address in Midtown Atlanta, it operated behind black lacquered doors and a guest list that no one was ever quite sure how to get onto. From the outside, it looked like luxury. Muted music, valets and silence, the kind of elegance that didn't need to announce itself. But those who knew, knew. The Jade Room wasn't just a place where powerful people came to unwind. It was the social face of something far darker, and it belonged entirely to Han Jae-hyun. Zainab Adeola had absolutely no business being there. At 27, she was a financial analyst, the kind of woman who ran her mornings on structure and her evenings on silence. Spreadsheets were her language. Precision was her personality. She had built her entire life around the comfort of things that added up, things that made sense, things she could verify with data. Her 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta was quiet, ordered, and safe. Her career was growing steadily. Her world was predictable, which was exactly why Kemi Aderonk was so dangerous to her. Kemi was everything Zainab kept herself from being. Bold in ways that took up space. Magnetic in ways that drew trouble without meaning to. The kind of woman who could walk into a room already on fire and somehow make you feel like the flames were the best part. They had been friends since their first year at university, opposites who understood each other in some language that had nothing to do with logic. Which was why, when Kemi called with that particular edge in her voice, the one that meant I need you and I'm not going to tell you the whole truth until we're already there, Zainab had sighed, gotten dressed and gone. I cannot believe you dragged me here, Zainab muttered as they were guided past a sleek reception desk toward an unmarked corridor. The woman leading them moved with practiced calm, as though she had escorted 1,000 guests to places they weren't quite ready for. Kemi's smile was wide and slightly too bright. It's just a conversation, she said, adjusting her clutch like it was armor. With who, exactly? Kemi hesitated just a fraction of a second, just enough. His name is Jae-hyun.
Han Ye-hyun.
He's someone I owe money to. Zainab stopped walking. How much money? Another pause. Kemi. A significant amount. How? Zainab, please. Kemi turned to face her then, and for the first time all evening, the bravado fell away completely. Underneath it was something raw and frightened. I know I made a mess. I know. But the only way out of this is through it, and I cannot walk in there alone. Just be my backup. You're the smartest person I know. If anyone can help me argue my way out of this, it's you. That was the thing about Kemi. For all her recklessness, she had never once let Zainab stand alone in her storms. Not when Zainab's mother was ill. Not when the job she'd wanted fell through. Not when the grief was too heavy to carry upright. Kemi had always been there, loud and warm and impossibly loyal underneath all the chaos. How was Zainab supposed to say no to that? Fine, she said quietly. But if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, it won't, I promise. Zainab squared her shoulders. Lead the way. The corridor opened into a private lounge that made her forget, for one full second, how to be afraid. The room was designed with the kind of taste that didn't need to try, deep tones, low light, and an atmosphere that felt like power had been built directly into the walls. Floor-length windows looked out over the Atlanta skyline, the city glittering far below like something that belonged to someone else entirely. And at the center of it all was him, 3 months earlier. Atlanta, Georgia. Zainab Adila's life made sense. That was the thing about it. The thing she had built deliberately, carefully, the way you build anything you don't want to lose. Sense. Structure. Predictability. She was up at 6:15 every morning. Coffee before conversation. Spreadsheets before sentiment. At 27, she had a career that rewarded precision, an apartment that rewarded quiet, and a routine that rewarded absolutely no surprises. Her colleagues called her the human calculator. She took it as a compliment. She had learned early that chaos was expensive, that reckless decisions had receipts, that the women in her family who had loved too fast, trusted too easily, and followed the wrong people into the wrong rooms had paid prices they were still settling years later. Zainab had decided, somewhere around age 19, that she would not be that woman. She had kept that promise to herself. Right up until Kemi called on a Thursday evening. Just come out. 2 hours. I'll have you home before 10. Zainab had the phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder, eyes still on the quarterly report open across her laptop. Kemi, I have a client review at 8 tomorrow morning, and you'll be rested and ready. 2 hours, Z. I just need company. There it was. I just need company. Kemi Adironk had been deploying that particular phrase since their first year at university, and it had never once meant what it sounded like. It meant, I've done something, I need backup, and I'm choosing not to explain fully until it's too late to turn around. Zainab knew this. She went anyway. That was the thing about Kemi that no logic could fully account for. She was, by every reasonable measure, a walking disruption. Bold in ways that cleared rooms and filled them simultaneously. Reckless with money, with men, with boundaries. The kind of woman who made terrible decisions with magnificent confidence and somehow landed on her feet just often enough to justify the pattern. But she was also the woman who had sat on a hospital floor with Zainab for 6 hours straight when the diagnosis came for Zainab's mother. Who had driven through the night, no questions asked, when Zainab called crying and couldn't explain why. Who had shown up every single time without being asked twice. You didn't abandon that kind of loyalty just because it sometimes wore dangerous shoes. So Zainab put on a blazer, locked her apartment, and got into Kemi's car. She noticed the neighborhood first. They had moved out of the familiar grid of Midtown and into something quieter, more deliberate. Streets lined with establishments that didn't advertise, where the clientele arrived in cars with tinted windows and left without photographs. Where exactly are we going? Zainab asked. It's called the Jade Room. Kemi's voice was carefully casual. Too carefully. Private venue. Very exclusive. And you got us in how? Pause just a beat too long. I know someone. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside, which Zainab would later understand was intentional. Black exterior, a single door, a man beside it who was the size of a small vehicle and made eye contact with Kemi in a way that suggested this was not her first visit. Inside, the air shifted. Wealth had a smell. Old money, fresh flowers, something underneath both that Zainab's instincts couldn't name but her body recognized immediately. The lighting was low and amber. The music was subtle enough to feel like it was coming from the walls themselves. Every surface gleamed, and every person in the room moved like they owned something. Zainab leaned toward Kemi. "Who does this place belong to?" Kemi opened her mouth. Then a man near the bar turned. And somehow, without being told, without any introduction, Zainab knew. The room wasn't just expensive. It was his. And she had just walked into the center of something she did not yet have words for. The man hadn't spoken yet, hadn't moved toward them, but his eyes had already found Zainab across the room. Steady, calculating, entirely unhurried, and something in her chest pulled tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear, or maybe everything to do with it. He didn't cross the room to greet them. He didn't need to. Han Jae-hyun stood near the far end of the lounge, one hand resting loosely at his side, the other holding a glass he hadn't touched in several minutes. He was speaking to someone, low, unhurried, but his eyes had already moved on, already settled, with quiet precision, on the two women who had just walked through his door. Zainab had met powerful men before. She worked with them regularly, CFOs, managing directors, men who filled boardrooms with performance and noise. They announced themselves, needed you to feel them entering. Jaehyun was not that. His power didn't fill the room. It organized it. Everything around him, the staff, the guests, the rhythm of conversation, operated in careful relation to where he stood, like a current running beneath still water. You couldn't see it, but everything moved accordingly. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, dark, controlled features, dressed simply in a way that probably cost more than her monthly rent. And he was walking toward them now. "Miss Adironk." His voice was even. No warmth, no threat, just precision. Korean accent softened by years in the States, but still present, still deliberate. Kemi straightened instantly. "Mr. Han, thank you for seeing us." Zainab noted the word choice. Noted also that Kemi had not once mentioned the word debt in the car. Jaehyun's gaze moved to Zainab, unhurried, assessing. "And you are her accountant," Zainab said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not quite amusement, more like recalibration. He gestured toward a private table near the window, away from the room's ambient noise, and waited until they were seated before he sat himself. A document appeared, produced by a man who materialized and disappeared without a word, and slid across the table toward Kemi. The number at the bottom made Zainab's stomach tighten. Kemi had borrowed against a business venture that collapsed. The debt had been absorbed by Jaehyun's organization. Structured, Kemi had apparently been told, as a short-term arrangement. But the interest applied was not short-term arithmetic. It was predatory, compounding at a rate that would have been illegal in any institution that answered to a regulatory body. Zainab looked at the document for 30 seconds. Then she looked up. "This calculation is wrong." Silence landed on the table like a third presence. Jaehyun's eyes moved to her slowly. "Excuse me?" "The compounding structure." She turned the document toward him and pointed, keeping her voice even, professional. "This applies monthly compounding on what was agreed as a simple interest arrangement. Over 7 months, that's inflated the total by roughly 31%. The number she actually owes on the original terms is significantly lower." Kemi had gone completely still beside her. Jaehyun hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. He was watching Zainab with an expression that revealed nothing and absorbed everything. The silence stretched. Then he reached across, took the document back, and studied it. A long moment passed. "You're correct," he said quietly. He wrote a new figure on the paper and slid it back. The revised number, accurate this time. Kemi exhaled beside her. barely audible, barely contained. They were preparing to leave when his voice came again. "Miss Adeola." Zainab turned. He was holding a small card between two fingers, extended toward her with the same unhurried certainty with which he did everything. "I need someone who reads numbers the way you do." A pause. "Come work for me." Every reasonable instinct she had said no. Said, "You know exactly what this room is. You know what he is. You know better." She took the card. "I'll think about it," she said. His expression didn't change. But somehow she already knew he knew. She wasn't going to think about it long. Outside, in the night air, Kemi grabbed her arm and let out a breath that had been held for an hour. Zainab said nothing. She was still looking at the card in her hand. Clean. Simple. Just a name and a number.
Han Ye-hyun.
She should have put it in her bag and forgotten it existed. Instead, she held it all the way home. She told herself it was just work. For the first 2 weeks, she almost believed it. The arrangement was straightforward, or at least it wore the costume of straightforward. Zainab reviewed financial records, identified irregularities, restructured reporting systems that had been built, she suspected, more for concealment than clarity. She asked no questions about the sources. She followed the numbers where they led and stopped precisely at the edges she wasn't meant to cross. Professional. Contained. Temporary. That was what she told herself every morning on the drive over. The late nights began by accident. A discrepancy in a subsidiary account kept her past midnight on a Wednesday. Jae-hyun was still in the building. He was always still in the building, and somewhere around 1 a.m. he appeared in the doorway of the office she'd been assigned, looked at the spread of documents across the desk, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Have you eaten?" She hadn't. Food appeared without further discussion. They sat on opposite sides of the desk, and he asked about the discrepancy, and she explained it, and somewhere inside that explanation the conversation shifted. Imperceptibly, the way seasons shift, into something else entirely. He talked about Busan, about arriving in Atlanta at 22 with a specific kind of hunger that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the need to matter. He spoke carefully, choosing words like a man unaccustomed to being heard and quietly uncertain what to do with the space she was offering him. Zainab listened, and understood for the first time that dangerous men are rarely born. They are built, slowly, by a world that gave them no softer options. It happened on a Friday night 3 weeks in. They were standing at the window, Atlanta sprawled below them, indifferent and glittering, and he said something quiet about how the city looked different from above, how distance changed the way you understood things. She turned to respond. He was already looking at her. Not the way he looked at numbers or problems or people who needed managing. Something unguarded lived in it, brief and unintentional. Like a door opened by accident that he hadn't yet decided to close. She didn't move away. Neither did he. The kiss was not urgent. It was careful, the way everything about him was careful, and it lasted only a moment before he pulled back and looked at her with an expression she couldn't name, something between restraint and surrender. "This complicates things," he said quietly. "I know," she said. Neither of them stepped back. Across the city, Kemi was burning in her own direction. Min-kyu had entered her orbit the same night Jae-hyun entered Zainab's. Younger, louder, a grin that arrived before he did and lingered after he left. Where Jae-hyun was controlled, Min-kyu was combustible. Charming in the way that kept you slightly off balance, always laughing, always moving, always just slightly too close. Their relationship had no edges, no steady ground. 1 week they didn't speak. The next, Kemi wasn't sleeping. She showed up to their standing Saturday lunch with shadows under her eyes and a smile that was either happiness or something wearing happiness as a mask. Zainab noticed, asked once. Kemi deflected beautifully the way she always did. By the end of the month, both women had crossed a line neither had announced. Not to each other, not to themselves. But the empire had them now, not by force but by something more durable. By attachment. By the specific warmth of being chosen by men who chose nothing carelessly. That was the thing about Jae-hyun that undid her, quietly and completely. He was not gentle with the world. But with Zainab he was deliberate, like she was something he did not want to mishandle. And she, who had spent years building walls with precision and discipline, was letting him learn exactly where the doors were. It started with coffee, specifically the way she couldn't finish it. Zainab had been drinking the same dark roast every morning for 4 years. 2 cups, no sugar, non-negotiable. But one Tuesday in October, she lifted the mug, caught the smell, and set it back down before it reached her lips. Her stomach turned in a slow, deliberate way that had nothing to do with illness. She told herself it was stress. She told herself that for 11 days. The pharmacy was 3 blocks from her apartment. She went at 7 a.m., before the city fully woke, and was back inside her bathroom before she'd allowed herself to think too carefully about what she was doing. She set the test on the counter, sat on the edge of the tub, waited. 2 minutes had never reorganized a life before. She hadn't known they could. 2 pink lines. She sat with it for a long time. The silence, the small plastic thing on her counter, the enormous fact of it pressing gently but insistently against every wall she'd built. She was 27, financially stable, professionally grounded, and deeply, irreversibly in love with a man who ran a criminal empire and had never once used the word love aloud. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. Still flat, still ordinary feeling. And yet, the fear was there. She wouldn't pretend otherwise. It sat in her chest like a stone. But underneath it, quieter, more persistent, was something she hadn't expected. Something that felt almost like joy. She spent 2 days deciding how to tell him. She rehearsed the conversation, discarded it, rehearsed it differently, tried to predict his expression, his stillness, the way he would process the information before responding, because Jaehyun never responded before he had processed. She didn't know what he would say. That uncertainty lived in her like a low current. But she had decided, by Thursday morning, that she would tell him that evening. She had made peace with the uncertainty. And then Kemi knocked. She didn't knock, actually. She used the spare key Zainab had given her in university and had never asked back. And she came through the front door already talking, already moving, already performing the particular brand of controlled chaos that meant something was genuinely wrong. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not react until I'm finished. Zainab turned from the kitchen counter. Kemi.
I'm pregnant.
The word landed and the room went quiet. Kemi was holding a test in her right hand, the same design, the same 2 lines, and her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was frightened but refusing to show it fully. The smile on her face was slightly too wide. Calibrated. It's Min Q's, she said quickly, like the speed of it would make it more convincing. Obviously. I mean, who else? She laughed. Came out wrong. Zainab watched her. Didn't speak. Didn't move. She had spent years reading Kemi the way she read financial documents. Not just the numbers on the surface, but the structure underneath. The architecture of what was actually being said. And Kemi's voice had done something just now. A waver. Small. Brief. The kind you only caught if you knew exactly where to listen. Kemi. Zainab set down the mug she was holding. Are you sure? Something moved across Kemi's face. Fast. Like a shadow crossing water. Before the wide smile returned. Of course I'm sure, she said. Why wouldn't I be sure? But she didn't quite meet Zainab's eyes when she said it. And Zainab, who had built her entire life on the ability to recognize when numbers didn't add up, felt the first cold thread of something she did not yet have a name for. Pull tight in her chest. And stay there. 3 weeks before the pregnancy tests, there had been the gala. Zainab had replayed it so many times since Kemi's confession that the memory had started to feel worn. Like fabric pulled too often in the same direction. She kept returning to it, looking for the detail she'd missed, the moment she should have seen coming. It had been beautiful, which was perhaps the cruelest part. The event was held in a private venue outside the city, the kind of space that existed for exactly 1 night and then folded back into discretion. Jaehyun's world didn't celebrate loudly, but when it did gather, it gathered completely. Candlelight. Champagne that arrived before you thought to ask for it. Conversation in 3 languages conducted at volumes designed to carry no further than the person beside you. Zainab had worn something deep green. Jaehyun had looked at her when she arrived with that particular expression. Controlled, deliberate, and underneath both of those things, something warmer that he had stopped trying to fully conceal. The evening had felt, for its first half, like something she might one day describe as perfect. Somewhere around the third hour, Jae-hyun was pulled aside by two men she didn't recognize. "Business," he said quietly, pressing his hand briefly against the small of her back. "An hour, maybe less." It was 2 hours before she saw him again. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. His world had interruptions built into it. She had learned not to pull at that thread. She'd found Kemi, who was drinking champagne at a rate that suggested the evening had already gone sideways, and stayed close. But Kemi had been fighting with Min-kyu. Zainab saw it happen. The sharp exchange near the east corridor, Kemi's jaw tight, Min-kyu's hands moving in that restless way of his when he was deflecting. Within 20 minutes, he had disappeared into the crowd and Kemi had disappeared toward the bar. By midnight, Zainab couldn't find either of them. Kemi had told her the rest 2 days after the pregnancy test. In pieces, reluctantly, the way you confess something you've been hoping you wouldn't have to. She'd had too much to drink. The argument with Min-kyu had turned something loose inside her and she had wandered through the east corridor, past rooms she hadn't been inside before, looking for a familiar face in a building full of people she didn't entirely trust. She found a room instead. Dark, quiet, a door that wasn't fully closed. Someone was inside. She had thought. She had been certain it was Min-kyu. She said she recognized something. His height, his build, the particular silence of him. She'd had too much champagne and too much grief and she hadn't turned on the light. By morning, she was back in her own hotel room, alone. She had told herself it was him. She had kept telling herself that, until she found the ring. She pulled it from her bag slowly, like it had weight beyond its size. Heavy, black, engraved along the inner band with a single character that Zainab recognized without needing it explained. She had seen it every day for 2 months. On Jae-hyun's hand, the room didn't spin. Zainab's rooms never spun. She didn't allow it. But something shifted in the floor beneath her, some foundational thing, and she gripped the edge of the counter and breathed. One thought arrived. Quiet, devastating, precise. Jae-hyun had been gone for 2 hours. Kemi had been in the East Wing. And now they were both pregnant. She set the ring on the counter between them and looked at her best friend. This woman she had known for a decade, whose face she could read like a native language, and saw something she had never seen there before. Not guilt. Worse than guilt. Genuine uncertainty. Kemi didn't know, which meant Zainab didn't know either. And not knowing, she was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous position either of them had ever been in. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was crying. Zainab didn't cry easily, had never been built that way, but because her mind had locked onto the problem the way it locked onto every problem, with a focused, relentless precision that refused to stand down until it had an answer. She lay in the dark and reconstructed the gala the way she reconstructed financial discrepancies. Methodically, chronologically, without sentiment. 2 hours. Jae-hyun had been gone for exactly 2 hours. The East Wing. Kemi. The ring. She arranged the facts in a row and looked at them. Then she got up, made coffee she didn't drink, and opened her laptop. She told herself it was just due diligence. The same thing she did with every account that didn't balance. You didn't accuse, you investigated. You followed the structure of the evidence until it told you something definitive. Emotion was not a methodology. Suspicion was not a conclusion. She started with the building layout. The venue's website still had a floor plan from a previous event, promotional material mostly but detailed enough. She found the East Wing, mapped it against what she remembered of the night, the corridor Kemi had described, the unmarked rooms, the distance from the main hall where Jae-hyun had been standing when he left her. The geography was possible. She hated that it was possible. Next, she went through her phone. Timestamps on photographs from the evening. A video Kemi had sent her at 10:47. Slightly unfocused, the background noise suggesting the main hall. A message from Jae-hyun at 11:52 saying he was finishing up and looking for her. 2 hours and 5 minutes unaccounted for. She stared at the timestamp until the numbers blurred. Then she thought about the staff. There was a woman, she'd noticed her at the gala, positioned near the east corridor all evening, the kind of still that suggested a specific function rather than a decorative one. Zainab had her name from the event program she'd tucked into her bag without knowing why. She noted it, circled it. The hardest part was not the evidence. The hardest part was what the evidence kept interrupting. Because in between every timestamp and floor plan, Jae-hyun was there, not as a suspect, but as himself. The version she knew. The version that had learned, slowly and deliberately, how to be soft with her specifically. The voice that said her name with a care that felt chosen rather than habitual. The man who had traced a pattern on the back of her hand one evening and not explained why, as if explanation would diminish it. She had believed that man completely. That was the thing she kept returning to, not the anger, not the fear, but the belief. How certain she had been. How unguarded she had allowed herself to become inside that certainty. She pressed her palm flat against her stomach. 2 heartbeats in this story. 2 women. 1 man with a 2-hour gap and a ring that had ended up in the wrong room. Love him, one part of her said. Be sure, said the part that had kept her alive this long. By morning, she had a timeline on paper, a list of 3 staff names, and 1 fact she could not yet explain away. The evidence did not confirm it, but it no longer cleared him either. And in the careful, precise world that Zainab Adeola had always inhabited, the absence of innocence was its own kind of answer. She folded the paper, looked out the window at an Atlanta morning that looked exactly as it always had. Then she picked up her phone, and decided it was time to look Jae-hyun in the eye. She drove to him instead of calling. Calling gave him time to prepare, and she needed to see his face. Unguarded, unrehearsed, in the first uncontrolled second before the composure settled back into place. That second was where the truth would live, if there was truth to find. He was in his private office when she arrived. He looked up when she entered and something in his expression shifted immediately. Not alarm, but alertness. He read her the way she had learned to read him, and whatever he found in her face made him set down what he was holding. Zainab. She closed the door behind her. She had planned the order carefully. The way she planned everything. Structured, sequential, emotional content managed until the facts were laid. But standing in front of him, with the ring in her bag and 2 months of love and 3 days of doubt pressing against her ribcage simultaneously, the order dissolved. I'm pregnant, she said. The room went absolutely still. His expression moved through something she had never seen on him before. A rapid, unguarded sequence she couldn't fully name. Shock? Then something slower. Something that settled into his features with a weight that didn't look like performance. With your child, she continued before he could speak. But that's not why I'm here. She placed the ring on the desk between them. He looked at it. Didn't touch it. Kemi is pregnant too, Zainab said. And she found that ring, in a dark room, in the East Wing, on the night of the gala. A pause. Measured. During the 2 hours, no one could account for your whereabouts. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Jae-hyun looked at the ring for a long moment. Then he looked at her, steadily, directly, with the full weight of his attention in the way that had undone her the first time and undid her again now, despite everything. Sit down, he said quietly. I'd rather stand. He accepted that. He reached into his desk drawer and produced his phone. Opened something. Slid it across the desk toward her without a word. Messages. Timestamped. 10:43 p.m. through 12:51 a.m. A series of encrypted exchanges with 2 names she recognized from the organization. A crisis, a rival network making contact. A negotiation conducted entirely in that East Corridor's private meeting room. A different room. On the opposite side of the wing from what Kemi had described. She read every message. Twice. I had 3 men with me the entire time, he said. You can speak to any of them. She looked up. His jaw was tight. Not with guilt, she knew what guilt looked like on people. This was something else. The controlled frustration of a man being asked to defend something he considered unthinkable. Zainab. He stood. Came around the desk slowly, stopping at a distance that gave her the choice, and waited there. I have never been a good man. I won't pretend otherwise. But I have not lied to you. Not once. She held his gaze. The baby, he said quietly. My child. Something moved across his expression. Raw, unperformed, the kind of emotion that didn't know how to be elegant. I don't need to think about it. I don't need time. Whatever this costs, we face it. The word we broke something open in her she hadn't known was sealed. She believed him. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for. That after all of it, standing in front of him with the evidence and the doubt and the ring on the desk between them, she believed him. Which meant the ring had not been his doing. Which meant someone else had been in that room. Which meant the man Kemi had found in the dark was not Jae-hyun. Her breath caught. Then who? The answer, when it finally came, didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived the way most devastating things did, quietly, through a detail so small she almost missed it. Jae-hyun had agreed to the investigation without hesitation. That, in itself, had told her something. A guilty man manages information. A guilty man controls the narrative, redirects the questions, creates elegant distance between himself and the evidence. Jae-hyun had done none of that. He had sat across from her, listened to everything she'd reconstructed, the timeline, the floor plan, the 2-hour gap, and when she finished, he had said, "Tell me what you need. Not, you're wrong. Not, how could you think that? Just, tell me what you need." She had needed the security footage. He gave her access within the hour. The East Wing camera covered a narrow corridor, functional, not comprehensive. But it was enough. Jae-hyun appeared in frame at 11:03 p.m., moving toward a room at the far end. 2 other men were with him. The door closed. It reopened at 12:58 a.m. All 3 of them, documents in hand, the particular exhaustion of men who had spent 2 hours negotiating something that mattered. A business meeting. Unscheduled, undocumented, and real. The room Kemi had entered was 3 doors down. Separated by a corridor she would have had to deliberately navigate. Zainab watched the timestamp until she was certain. Then she pulled up the adjacent camera. Min-kyu appeared at 10:41 p.m. Not in the main hall. Not anywhere near the argument Kemi had described. He was in the West Wing, on the opposite end of the building, with his phone pressed to his ear and an expression on his face that Zainab had never seen in all her months of peripheral observation. Controlled. Deliberate. Directing something. She rewound. Watched it again. He made 3 calls inside 17 minutes. Between the second and third, he sent someone, one of the junior staff, toward the east corridor. Toward the room. The same room. She brought it to Kemi gently, because there was no other way to bring it. She laid out the footage. The timestamps. The geography. The calls. She didn't editorialize. She just let the structure speak, the way evidence always speaks when it's been assembled honestly. Kemi watched in silence. Then she pressed both hands over her mouth and made a sound Zainab had never heard from her before. Not crying. Something beneath crying. Something foundational giving way. He set it up, Kemi whispered. Zainab didn't answer. Didn't need to. Min-kyu had known about Kemi's argument with him that night. Had escalated it deliberately. Had ensured she was upset and drinking and disoriented and moving through a building she didn't know. Someone had been placed in that room. Someone who was not Jae-hyun, had never been Jae-hyun, but who existed in that darkness long enough for the confusion to take root. The ring had been the final piece. Not evidence of guilt. Evidence of access. Someone had taken it. Placed it. Built an entire deception out of one dark room and one broken night. Jae-hyun, when she told him, went very still. The stillness was different from his usual composure. This had an edge underneath it. Something cold and load-bearing, the kind of quiet that precedes consequence. Min-kyu, he said. One word. Flat. We don't know his motive yet, Zainab said carefully.
Ido.
His jaw tightened. He's been moving against me for months. I just didn't expect. He stopped. Looked at her. At her stomach. I didn't expect him to use you. That night, Zainab sat alone with the timeline spread before her. All of it assembled. All of it answered. Except one thing. She picked up her pen and wrote it down, because writing helped her think and thinking was the only tool she fully trusted. Why that night specifically? What was he trying to destroy, the relationship, the empire, or something else? She stared at the question, and understood, with the slow certainty of someone who has followed evidence long enough to know when a thread leads somewhere larger, that the gala had not been a moment of chaos someone exploited. It had been planned, rehearsed, targeted. This wasn't a man acting on jealousy or impulse. This was an architect, and somewhere beneath the relief of the truth, beneath the anger and the exhaustion and the gratitude that Jaehyun was exactly who she had believed him to be, Zainab felt something cold settle at the base of her spine, because architects didn't stop at one design. And whatever Minkyu had been building that night, it wasn't finished yet.